So, welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us in our second Sketch It Out episode. Just a couple things before we start. These meetings are recorded. I know this is a webinar session, but just in case, just switch off your camera and mute yourselves. If you have any questions, you can leave it in the chat box, and we'll be sure to get to those questions once this is done. Once you're done sketching, please tag us on Instagram at layersofdesign_ with the hashtag layers of sketches, just so we can see your beautiful sketches and repost. You can connect with us on Instagram, Twitter, and Pinterest. And don't forget to listen to our episodes on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, TuneIn, all of the major podcast platforms, as well as our website, layersofdesign.online. Okay, so we're here for the second episode of Sketch It Out. And as many of you know, our guest today is Akinade Aderele, and we'll be talking about how architecture is a tool of colonial oppression. So just a little bit about Akinade. I actually went to high school with him, and it's been great knowing him so far. He's extremely brilliant. He is a construction project engineer, the founder of Pod Save Africa, which is an awesome podcast talking about the continent of Africa. And he is an infrastructure development enthusiast. So welcome, Akinade, and, just tell us a bit about yourself.
Thank you for having me. I think that fairly well sums it up. At least sums up kind of the phase of life I am. Like, if you took a snapshot, that's kind of where I'm at. As Abe was kind enough to mention, we went to high school together back in Nigeria. So, man, like, I'm sorry to think of how long ago that was. So, man, yeah. Different times.
I know.
I'm so full of life. But we thank God for progress. Anyways, so I came to the States right after high school. I did a gap year. I came to the States right after high school. The goal for me was to study architecture. Studied architecture for 5 years, did a B.Arch at Illinois Tech. The Mies School of Architecture and that style of modernism was kind of what was the impression on us. But then a couple of years in, I got a little more exposure to the construction side, and I was like, I'm curious intellectually about what this looks like. So I did a first master's in construction management while I was completing my architecture degree. In the meantime, I got the opportunity to work for a family fund, private equity firm, and they were building a few kind of buildings for themselves in the Chicagoland area. So I worked on a few large Class A buildings as a owner's representative. That's what they call it here in the U.S. So I represent the owner's interest. And then, after doing that for 2 years, I was like, man, I kind of want to know what it is like to actually build buildings. I want to feel the mud on my boots every day. So I went and worked for Gilbane Building Company. Gilbane is one of the largest construction companies in the country and probably in the world as well, especially with our specialty on buildings. I worked on a team that focused on very difficult renovations and building styles. I did that for a little over 3 years, which concluded actually yesterday. Yesterday was my day before yesterday. Friday was my very last day there at the firm. It was an interesting journey. I got to build all types of cool buildings. I really got to see like what actually happens behind the scenes in building on job sites. And then now, man, I'm jobless, y'all. Man, Bowen. The link to my GoFundMe shall be. I'm joking. I'm not joking, but I'm joking. I'll be starting at business school in the fall here in Chicago. So I'm back in Chicago to do that.
Okay, so well, first of all, I want to talk about like your construction management journey. I guess, how was that with the mix of, already studying architecture and then going into construction management?
Okay, so it was immensely valuable. One of the things that architecture teaches you about over and over again, you're being trained very much on space management and spatial relationships, right? How do you make things fit in spaces? You're trying to accomplish this type of visual effect. How do you get there? Or, what type of material can you pick to do this, that, and next? I found myself that, even though I was the builder, I wasn't
Yeah.
the guy who designed it. I found myself that a lot of times when the architect brought up an issue or they were having a conundrum, I just off the snap make a suggestion. How about we do it this way? Maybe if we use an angle here, C channel, they would it was very easy for me to understand what the architect wanted to see.
Mm.
So it made me very valuable in providing solutions fairly quickly. My job as a project engineer was really just to solve problems, beyond just information process and all that stuff. Is like you're a firefighter running around and just putting out fires all day every day for 4 hours. So it helped me really understand and work with architects very well. It also made me kind of empathetic to them because, like, we the construction firm are like, yo, we need these drawings tomorrow. What's taking this architect so long? What is this, man? It's like, just redesign this whole building. It's been a weekend. Come on, it's Monday now.
Yeah.
Hurry up, and I think I came in with a level because I've worked at architecture firms. I've worked on short deadlines. I've worked when the client has changed their mind and we have to redo a whole type of curtain wall over
Yeah.
type of thing. So I had an empathy for it. So I was never the guy that was like, architects, you promised me this on Monday. It's Monday nights. Where is it? I was never that guy. So it helped me have very good relationships with all the architects I worked with. In fact,
Oh,
some
wow.
I consider fairly good friends even moving forward from that part of my career. And yeah, so it was very helpful, and I would say those two ways. But
Okay.
then architects work hard too. So
Yeah.
construction managers also work quite hard, and it's a tasking job from a physical standpoint. You'll also, like, architects spend a lot of time kind of working on technical stuff at their desk, things like
Mhm.
that. Project engineering is like running around a lot. However, architects spend a lot of time. Like when I worked at architecture firms, it was like late hours a lot of times. And the nature of the jobs we did, like I said earlier, meant that even as a project engineer, I had to be like up to God knows when hours. So I think it helped a lot. And architecture school, you guys, architecture school, you know the
Yeah.
vibes, you know what it is, all
For
nighters,
sure.
back to back. So that prepared me for a tasking career professional.
That's very interesting, actually, because I also recently quit my job. I've been working at a different architecture firm since 2016. And I kind of just wanted to take a step back, really, to see what exactly I wanted to do because I felt like I wasn't very hands on in the profession. So I've been thinking, not that I've been thinking, I actually am looking for jobs in like construction management because I
Okay.
feel like that's where I will get a lot of the hands-on experience. So it's great hearing hearing your own experience because it's like some things that I learned in architecture school and in my career can still trickle down to this new career journey, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. I'm not telling you to go work for the construction management firms, but I understand where you're at. I'm just saying. So please go ahead.
So, what would you say like your passions have been for architecture and design and construction and all of that? Like, what got you started?
Okay. Oh man, we go way back. So we go way back to before I was born. All
Oh,
right.
wow. Okay.
My grandfather, in
Mm-hmm.
fact, almost as far back as I can remember, kind of just generationally, people in my family have been involved in the building industry. My great grandfather was a mason. Person after him was a builder. Person after that was my grandfather was an architect, he actually got to rise to some level of prominence in Nigeria at the time. At the point he died, unfortunately, quite early in his life. But at the point when he passed, he was commissioned to design all of Nigeria's international airports. He only completed Jos's airports by the time he passed. But he was, fairly
Wow.
influential figure. He designed a whole ton of buildings in the Nigerian landscape. And this is somebody who died at 40. So just, he was doing quite a
Wow.
strong output of work. So he had so much work, there was so much influence, there's so many people he had relationships with. In fact, a lot of the folks who work at many or who run many of the major architecture firms in Nigeria right now at one point worked in his office as interns or as younger architects at the time. So there was almost this ethos of legacy around this architecture idea when I was growing up. My father also studied architecture and then runs a firm that does a lot of architecture support services to contracting firms, things like that. So I always had it on. It was like And my dad would take me out to tell me, "Oh, this is a brutalist building from the." Da, da, da. I was like 5 years old. I'm like, "God, I don't care," but it seeped in. It seeped in, and I began to deeply care. Not so much just about the visual aspect and the aesthetics, or how somebody designs this and it's very cool, and see the brilliance of the way they work with the sun positioning and all that type of stuff. It was more so, I got to see somebody that I never met, who was my grandfather, have such a profound, like, people would see us and be like, oh, because I was also named after my grandfather. So people would like see us and be like, oh, you're Akinade Aderele. They tell me one like long ass story from the what 40s or whatever they lived, about how my grandfather and them had this effect, or a church would come and say, oh, they're doing a naming thing after my grandfather because he
Wow.
designed the church pro bono. Things just like the amount of impact that he had post life. And this is, I was born over um I was born over 30 years after my grandfather died. Probably more close to about 50 years. But like hearing that level of impact post death, even for somebody who didn't live a long life, was like,
Mm-hmm.
wow, this is a profound amount of impact a single individual can
Yeah.
have just by architecture. So, and there was nothing else that matched that. There was no other profession that I saw that was like, okay, I could have a lifetime that would impact hundreds, probably
Of
thousands,
people.
right?
Wow.
So that was what drew me to it. It was like, okay, I want to have a broad, wonderful impact on the things I built to outlast me by multiple generations, and that's what brought me. That's what brought me to it. Yeah.
That's amazing. And I mean, I think that's also the beauty and the power of architecture, because of just, even way after us, our imprints are still there, once you have that kind of successful career. And the best part, honestly, is that you get to help people. That's
Yep.
that's one of the reasons I love architecture.
Yeah.
Okay.
The like magical feeling of like seeing people use a space you help design is like,
Yes.
that's indescribable. Nothing matches it.
Okay, so let's start talking about the topic at hand, which is architecture as a tool of colonial oppression. I
Mm-hmm.
personally really love this topic, and I am excited to talk about this. And I
Mm-hmm.
honestly think you are the perfect guest
Okay.
for this
Perfect. Wow.
topic.
That's a lot of pressure. Something. Okay.
No, I'm serious though, because I feel like you're very knowledgeable, first of all, about, the environment in Africa, and also about just this topic in general. And I know personally, I have been educating myself
Mm-hmm.
with this in particular, because I find myself looking for, just kind of looking back at buildings from home. And every time I go home, I find myself taking pictures. And anytime I want to sit down and really study that building, I realized this building was actually not by a Nigerian architect,
Right.
and that really got me thinking, and it kind of rubbed me the wrong way, because I'm like, I'm in my own city, and these buildings, no matter how new or how old they are, it leaves me wondering, where are architects, where are our buildings, where is the representation of us, even in the states at home. So yeah, let's get started with the topic.
Yeah, yeah. So, topic for today is architecture as a tool of colonial oppression. Um, I've been so just to kind of step back a little bit. Part of the reason why I found myself in recent years kind of doused into both African news, culture, and things of that nature is because I run a podcast as well. Um, Abe mentioned at the very beginning, I run a podcast called Pod Save Africa, and I'm not going to just go into what we do, but what that's helped me do is that because I'm putting out all this information about the continent, I've had to, of course, research. I know what I'm saying. So over the past 4 years, it's almost just been like me just kind of researching, both through actual research on the internet and whatnot, and but through interviewing folks. So that's helped kind of broaden my knowledge base. And also, what has helped me realize too is that the way we understand history,
Mhm.
it always is colored by where you're finding your history, who's writing those books, things of that nature. Architecture is exactly the same way. We've gotten to the point, just like you were saying, where if you go to, for example, Lagos now, and you look at some of the most memorable buildings, some of the most like this is a staple of Lagos architecture, like the church in downtown Lagos that everybody, you know, takes photos of, this, that, and the next. That building was not designed by a Nigerian architect. So when you go in and start to like dive into it, you start to see that, okay, like, okay, so where's our own vernacular architecture? Where's our own, what is Nigerian architecture? What is African architecture, period? In fact, if you go on Arc Daily, for the architects on the group, you probably know the website called Arc Daily, and you start to Google like African architecture, South Africa, I think they let you search by countries. Start to look up those firms and you're like, there's not even one Black person in your firm. Talk less
Yeah.
of like, this
Yeah.
being, you know,
I've
so
done it, so I know.
yeah, so it's an ongoing. It's not a, oh, they kind of, you know, came here and bamboozled us. They've it's an ongoing kind of issue. And I think that there are multiple reasons why this happens. One, if you step back, we're colonized straight up. And unfortunately, part of the work of colonialism at the same time is to dampen down how bad colonialism was.
Wow.
Right. But that's part of the way. Like if I'm going to a place and doing evil things, I also want to cover my tracks so that's 30
For
years down
sure.
the line, you know, nobody comes from me or repaints what I've said history looks like. So I think let's look, for example, at let's step back. Let's step back. Sorry, I like to step back. I like to kind of look at the broader picture. When the British, for example, let's take Nigeria as a case study because that's where I'm from. When the British came to Nigeria, they did a few things fairly quickly. They didn't immediately like, you know, come in guns blazing, boom, 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 everybody die. Well,
Yeah.
that's not how it worked. They came, you know, through, it was fairly small. They did some trading with people, you know, they would take prisoners of war in exchange for guns and things like that. They just, you know, little things. Of course, they won't give you the Nigerians the newer guns. They'll give them the old stuff that, you know, the Nigerians didn't have the technology at the time. So it's like, okay, snap, this is something we can use in our battles against the other kingdoms. So they allowed very many Nigerian kingdoms to effectively weaken themselves through civil wars, through internal conflicts. And sometime in the 1800s, which is when they started to make their first like major inquest into the Nigerian stratosphere. They started to actually like formally bring military might, and you know, there are battles in Sokoto, there's some battles in the Yoruba kingdom, not quite as many. People are very familiar with the battles in Benin. That's a very large and storied history. But it wasn't, so Nigerian people, they just chill and said, oh, they have guns.
Exactly.
I guess we're gonna just relax. No, they fought, and you know, thousands of people, hundreds of thousands of people died as a result. However, the British knew they had a few things at their advantage. They were fighting a fragmented set of people. There wasn't a Nigeria. We're just a bunch of people living in our kingdoms, living our life, having our culture, and they would just come say, okay, after I beat this person, I'll beat that person. And they did those things fairly quickly. The conquest of Nigeria didn't take 100 years. It was probably a few battles over a 30 to 40-year period. It wasn't, you know, so there wasn't even time for us to say, oh, God, they're coming, let's organize and like fight these guys back. And as part of kind of that conquest, they did a few things. They decided, you know, of course, with the conference in Belgium, they decided that, oh, you know, here's what is going to be the British area all over Western Africa, let's say. And they, you know, portioned out a part called Nigeria, and in 1914, they amalgamated the southern half and the northern half of that. Now, just before our amalgamation in 1914, there was a major war in Kano, right? So they fought the Kano Empire. What people don't understand is that there were massive kingdoms in Nigeria already. There was a massive Kano Empire. There was a massive Western Empire. The Eastern Empire was a little more fragmented because they just didn't work very hierarchically. It's just a slightly cultural difference. Even the Yoruba kingdom is not as hierarchical as the Northern Kingdom, but the Northern Kingdom really, I mean, they really fought quite a while. And then if you look historically, shortly after is when they build or they complete the railroad that carries resources all the way from the north down to the south, right? And one of the ways to think about their infrastructure development is that if they're the British, they're not coming here to build railroads so that Nigerians can have access to the north. It's like, we want you guys to be able to explore and see how large this wonderful country. No, they didn't care about any of that. It was railroads straight up for, let's go there. We want granite and colonels from the north. We want to ship it out. Okay, where's the oil? It's in the south. Let's build another railroad. It was effectively just rent control, resource control, and military might. It was like, how can we quickly get our guys as quickly as possible up to, you know, up to them. And then it also diminished the ability for Nigerians to resist, because even if Nigerians wanted to cobble together, between a few kingdoms, the British could move much faster because they had trains, right? I don't know how many horses you've met that can run as fast as a train, but they don't. It's just not a thing that happens. So the technological advantage meant that Nigerians were kind of always on the back foot, so losing people, having their kingdoms taken to them, and then the infrastructure setup of how modern Nigeria even is. Even our current railroads are built around generally the same structure. So our towns, where our major towns ended up being, were majorly, with the exception of a few places where there's some kingdoms, were based on the British. The British essentially decided, okay, here's where the resources we're building into. Wow. Here's where the resources. So the fabric of where most of the African continent is set up is based on British extractive resource control. Now, there's another part to that too. Even down to the micro level, when you kind of start to dig deeper, some ideas like gated communities, VG, Victoria Garden City. Some of you rich folks live in Lagos. If you're listening, no offense, but that was built for the British, and it was one of the earliest gated communities in Nigeria. And now we start to think about, why do all of us live in estates here? That's not a cultural phenomenon. In fact, that was almost exclusive to the palace.
Even the single family housing.
Yes, we live in single family houses. Your neighbor is right there. And it wasn't based on hierarchies. Okay, if you can afford the house, here's your house. One person can afford this house.
Exactly.
Here's his house, things like that. So some of those ideas around, wealth structure, wealth hierarchy, beyond just, so royalty had their own parts. And even then, most of the royal parties were fairly accessible to regular people. In fact, that was part of the idea. So you come and you now start to think of even the fabric of how we think and how we've kind of structured our own hierarchies. It's a very, very thorough and insidious infiltration into how modern life in many African countries is operated. Not to even talk less of places like South Africa, where apartheid just lasted so long to 90. I was born before apartheid ended, just to give you some context. So it wasn't an old thing. I know they always show you the pictures in black and white. Nah, those pictures were in color. Then definition if you want. But those things happen so badly where entire areas, are segmented to the poor, to the black, to the coloreds, and even the historical, even the societal structure is structured that way as well. So that's the big picture now. Yes, that's the boring stuff. That's here's how they've kind of messed us up, at the big level. Now, when you start to dive into the architecture itself, one of the things that's very strangely associated with Africa is huts. Now, that's not strange because it's a thing that doesn't exist. We use huts all the time. We have lots of huts. Huts everywhere. In fact, if you came to Nigeria in the late 1800s, you'd probably see just multiple variations of some type of what you'd consider the topographical slope with a circular area right beneath it. However, why does that association automatically turn into barbarism or poverty or stupidity or lack of capability? I was telling Ebehi just before this podcast started. What do you think a Roma Rotunda is? The Roma Rotundas were just slightly different huts, right? They built things that, architecturally were appealing, but also work for them. But when you start to dive into even the construction of what a hut's roof looks like, that's not easy to build. How many people do you see building rotunda or structures nowadays? It is not simple to build, right? So these were complex things that were built by people, not just because they just found a shape and everyone's like, all right, he did a hut, I guess we're all gonna do a hut. This was a shape that worked for them, right? African culture, African environments are very hot, right? Hot air rises to the top. Incredibly effective way for keeping the lower part of their buildings very cool. That's why they were built that way, right? And they funneled that shape up so that heat would always rise and be encouraged to rise out of those buildings. So as part of this podcast, what I've kind of discussed with you is, we're going to actually dive into what a hut is. Everybody's going to sketch a hut. And the way I'd like to do it is that I'd like you to if you're following along, I'd like you to with a sketch pad, I'd like you to draw a line through your sheet of paper, right? Let's start there. Let me put my screen in the house so I can draw along with you guys. So I'd like you to, let me get off full screen here. So I'd like you to put a line through your sketch pad, right? And on the left half, I'd like you to sketch what you think the outside of a hut looks like, right, on the left side. And this is just the general instructions. I just want to see where everybody goes. And it's gonna be as simple as you think, as complex as you want to be. Huts generally, visually, typically end up being fairly simple. And then on the right side, I'd like you to take a cut through. So if you're an architect, it's what you call a section, right? So it's like sketching what's on the inside, right? You're cutting through like a cake, cutting through the building halfway through and taking a sketch and saying, okay, this is how I think structurally and visually and architecturally the space was arranged. Well, let's just go at it. Let's have a go at it, because I think that when we start to ask folks this question, it's like, okay, well, it couldn't have just been an empty room. These folks had rooms, they had special arrangements depending on whether it was a palace or somebody's bedroom. Those things looked very different. And then I don't know, how does this work? Do we just like wait a few minutes and let everybody sketch, or do we talk while we sketch?
Well, we talk while we sketch.
Okay, sounds good. Now I'm gonna caveat this, that I'm not the greatest sketcher in the world, so I also have a photo, like a few screenshots to share from a book I own that kind of exemplify some of the points I'm trying to make. Let's see.
Wow, this section of this hut.
Yeah, hey.
I don't think I'm doing so hard over here.
That's a-okay. And you realize even the things that are difficult to draw are also often the things that are difficult to build, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we aren't just out here building huts just because.
Because I mean, while we draw it, I mean that's the way you get to understand how it was built, right?
Exactly. Let's see.
I'm just going to crochet these walls.
There you go. So what brought you to architecture?
Oh, well, personally, this actually way back. I think I've told this story a couple times on the podcast, but
Okay.
I'm going to say it again because it's one of my favorite stories to tell. Well, I think I was like for sure I was still in elementary school, in primary school, right? And I remember vividly driving from like Ikoyi to VI because I went to Corona School, Victoria Island in Lagos. So driving to school, once we got down from the bridge, there's this I don't know if you remember it, like once you get like down from the bridge from Ikoyi, you can either go left to VI or right to like the Lekki area.
Okay.
So around that street, I always used to see I used to see like homeless people. I used to see a lot of immigrants. And I used to wonder, it just used to break my heart. And I remember being so young, right? And I just used to wonder, wow, like how is this country going to change? Like why are people sleeping on the streets? Why do people have to beg? And I remember having conversations with my dad, a lot of those conversations. And so he's like, okay, so what are you going to do about it? Pretty much, right? And I was like, well, I don't want to go into politics because I didn't want to mess with the politics in Nigeria.
Right.
And I was like, okay, well, I just feel like I want them to not be on the street, right? I want people to see them as people of value. I want them to be part of the community again. So I would like if they could live in communities, if there was just a community where there'll be houses, there are like schools, there's a hospital. So then my dad was like, okay, well, you sound like you want to go into architecture because if you're in architecture, you'll be able to design these communities. So I was like, oh, that's actually interesting. So that's where I started thinking about architecture. And then I think when I was in high school, I used to have an aunt that was an architect and she used to stay with us at the time. So I would always see her draw and I was like, okay, this is pretty cool. Like if she's just staying all day and drawing, that sounds awesome because I love to draw.
Right.
Then, when I got to high school, my ideas I really started realizing these ideas of actually building communities for people. And that's when I got super interested into buildings and just how buildings are shaped.
Okay.
That's what got me in.
Wow. Okay, man, that's wonderful. Yeah, I think I often find that people from countries like ours tend to not have the luxury, certain types of, I would say, intellectual luxuries that other folks from, I would say, more advanced countries tend to have.
Definitely.
That we grow up, we say, okay, we want to solve problems, we want to help fix things, and in a more advanced country like this, I've met folks who are like, hey, I used Bank of America last week and my payments took 2 hours as opposed to 2 seconds. And I want to solve that. I build a company, I make
Mm.
I make a product that does that, and I make a ton of money, this, that, and next. Whereas if you meet a typical, let's say Kenyan or Nigerian or South African, the ideas are like, okay, you know, we have an educational gap. We want to solve that, or we want to fix, power, or we want to fix, public housing, things like our
Yes, it's always the
problems are
basic
almost,
things.
yes, it's always like based around those core ideas of, having comfortable shelter, having food, having education. And it's always something that intrigues me. And I always think that, man, if I was born in America, would I have a different kind of outlook on these things? Would I still care? I try not to kind of dive too deep into those hypotheticals, but
Hmm.
it's almost, I don't want to say depressing, but it's kind of depressing that we don't have that luxury
Hmm.
of a
No,
life. Yeah.
I completely agree with you because I also have that, I also have that thought process very often. And I'm like, I wonder how it is to just sit down and think of the next thing, right? Because this is the way I
Right.
always see it. I feel like for me, I'm thinking of how can I just make something like a basic structure with the
Right.
least amount of materials, with the least amount of money to help
Right.
large amount, like large,
Large amounts of people
yes.
survive. Live safely.
Exactly. As
Yeah.
opposed to, okay, I already know how to build this basic stuff. I already know that my people have this basic stuff. Now let's push it to the next, to the next level. How about we create this cool building that'll be the representation of the country, Because
Right. Right.
every time, of course, Lagos definitely has beautiful buildings. That's no,
That's
I'm not taking anything away from the advancement in
right.
Lagos, right?
Right.
But I would love to see, personally, I'm from Edo State, and anytime I
Okay.
go back home, that's one of my passions, just to start thinking like, okay, what if, there was this public space or this kind of schools or these housings, just like the
Right.
basic needs to just almost put my people on the same platform so we can stop thinking about just surviving and more
Yeah.
of, okay, what's the next level, you know?
But available. Yeah. 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 I think when people consider this idea of a third world country, one of the things that people don't quite, I would say, fully understand about it is how much people's individuals' lives are centered around this idea of just surviving. Like
Yeah,
the vast majority of people are just looking forward to eat today. So it's
for
not,
real.
yeah, there's not a large amount of I would say wiggle room for many people who live in societies like ours. So and it's part of the challenge for generations like ours that, okay, the world is more exposed than it has ever been before. The poor people in the poor countries now know. I mean, they always knew they were struggling, but they now know, through more access than they've ever had in history, that they are also poor. Which is a
Yes.
very powerful thing. So the question is, what do we do about it? So I have large ideas as part of kind of this furthering of my education as well. That's okay. What other things can we do to enable ourselves to have leverage in the societies we live in? So yeah, I'm excited for the challenge, and I hope I hope there are more people like us that think about these things and want to do that kind of work.
Same. I always hope so too. But I got this great advice from a professor of mine, Malik Benjamin. He
Yeah.
came on as a guest a couple episodes back. It was episode
Okay.
30.
Okay.
And so I started talking to him about, the ideas that I have and how I always wonder how it will be, how I could bring other people to have the same passions and so we could collaborate and work together. And he
Mm-hmm.
stopped me for a second and he was like, the thing about what I'm trying to do, like what we are trying to do, is
Mm-hmm.
that I need to stop thinking of bringing people along, that I need to just go ahead and do it, you
Yeah.
know, and that from there, more people will come because they can see the results. So they can see, okay, so this is actually working out. And that was actually a great idea because I never thought about it that way. I was always thinking, oh, I need more people in order to create something.
No, 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 no. The boundaries that we've told ourselves, or that the previous generation have told us, are they were always artificial. If you think back to, for example, Nigeria's history,
Mm-hmm.
the guys who ran the country, the guys who brought us to freedom or liberation from colonial rule. When you start to think about those folks, most of those folks were most of those folks were in their 30s, right? Early 30s too.
Mm-hmm.
Like I was looking at, the guys who did the first major military coup that ended up being the generation that ran this country or that still runs this country. Those guys were in their 30s when that happened, like early 30s. In fact, some of them were in their 20s, late 20s. So when you start to have that context of, wow, see the level of impact, for good or for bad, these individuals were thinking of making at such young ages.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I'm not 30 yet, but I think there are folks. I think there are folks that we could emulate. That in terms of the bravado, we have to be just as I would say.
Yeah,
Yeah, I don't know if the word is arrogant, but just as bold about our own futures. Because if we're not, there's nobody else to be for us. So
yep.
and if you express some dissatisfaction with the current state of things, you got to be bold with trying to solve those problems. So, and that's of course easy to say. I'm here in America, my electricity works. I'm on a Zoom call with the internet that works fine, and things of that nature. So I understand the privilege there, but
Yeah, of course.
in that privilege, I also understand the importance for people like me to do the work. So,
I feel, and talking about the privilege, I always sit down and I think like, this is amazing. I have this privilege, and I'm like, I just feel I need to do more with it, right? Because I feel okay, I'm here, I have accomplished this much. Now I just feel the need to give back.
mm,
Does that make sense?
yes, it makes sense. I completely understand. And try not to get in the, or at least I try not to get in the um I try not to get in the idea of like, oh, I have to do something major. Like I have to organize guys that's gonna beat all the leaders in Nigeria. I don't have that. I don't have that impression that the work has to be grand immediately.
Yeah.
I think that's I want to every year be progressively more involved, doing
Mhm.
better. Cause like I think it's a cumulative, at least for me personally, I think it ends up being okay. The cumulative results of this guy's efforts across his life were very valuable. Not he did this major thing at the age of 35 that changed everything. Because I think the latter is just far less likely,
For sure.
and
Okay.
also far more dangerous. So if you know what I'm talking about.
You know.
So, yeah. The work of doing good in Nigeria often is unfortunately quite dangerous. So,
Okay, so I think my sketch is ready of this
oh
hunt.
boy, you better stop because you people sketching at the speed of light.
No, I don't know. Let me.
Oh no, do your thing, please. If it's ready, please show the group.
It looks more like a house.
Okay.
So this is this is what I have.
Let me see. Let me switch back my screens. Whoops. There we go. Oh, okay. There we go. So you got it. Okay, so you got windows looking through the center. Okay, wonderful. Okay, so I see trusses. That's
Yes, that's how I
accurate.
imagine it. Um,
Okay. Ooh.
then outside here, I think of like a thatched roof.
Okay.
Yeah, so that's
Yeah,
it.
I think I see we got some two questions.
Oh, okay.
Yes. So I see question number one, a question for both of you. Do you think design is looked at as a luxury instead of a need in Nigeria? Hmm. Oh boy, that's a great question.
That's a great
Give
question.
yourself a high five. That's a phenomenal question. Do you want to go first?
Oh, yes, for sure. So I think yes and no,
Mm-hmm.
right? So the first thing, for sure, we do look at it as a luxury, especially in cities like Lagos.
Uh-huh.
And for example, the new Eco Atlantic City that's coming up right now. Um, that's like a luxury, and there's this exclusivity behind certain design styles in Nigeria, right? Especially when you start seeing architects like oh, we're trying to design like how the Europeans design, or like how we've seen it in the States, because automatically we connect that to good design, right? And then I do see architecture as a need, or rather design as a need, because a lot of our infrastructure still needs to be developed. We're not there yet with a lot of public buildings, public housing.
Mm-hmm.
So I see it as both.
I completely agree. I think we design is beautiful in this one way more than anything else. That the the real cost, or
Mm-hmm.
the most important cost, is a creative cost, right? It's the individual with an idea in their brain deciding that, oh, here's how I want to put things together. However, I have seen two buildings, even in Nigeria, multiple times, exact same materials, just about the same cost, and one is just designed a million times better than the other one. So oftentimes the scarcity really is finding people with that level of ideas, and clients that are willing to let them kind of let's be brave together. Your house doesn't have to look exactly like your neighbor's house. You don't have to have a pitched roof that's pitched to angle 87, which is for some odd reason what we keep doing in Lagos. There was another question that just popped. Okay, so we we have this kind of, it's kind of a blessing and a curse in that, folks, there's creative ability everywhere. Just having this cultural understand that that's, try something new, do something interesting. And you see it every so often. If you drive around Lagos, drive around cities, drive around Ibadan, so if I see houses that are like, oh wow, this guy was, whoever designed that was thinking, and it's like, oh, the owner just took an extra 30 minutes to think things through differently. So we have, it is definitely looked as a luxury. European design, certainly, things with glass facades, things like that. It's always like, oh, we want to design like the Europeans. I mean, look at Dolphin Estate in Lagos, for example. Absurd. I mean, it's one of the people consider it as one of the rich people absurd, beautiful places. But in a Nigeria that doesn't have constant electricity, it is an absurd place to live. The windows are tiny. It
I
gets
mean,
hot very quickly. The building is super dark. The overhangs aren't very well arranged. They essentially copied and pasted one design from Africa, from Europe, and just dropped it a billion times in on an estate, because it's a fairly large estate, but just so poorly done. It's
yes.
almost absurd. Um, no offense to anybody who lives there. Sorry.
No, 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 I completely agree. I used to live there. That's where I
Yeah.
actually grew up. And I used to, I mean, back then, I know when it first came out, it was like the Lekki, right?
Yes. Yes. It was like, wow,
Wow,
hot.
like this is it.
You
Cause
have money. That's where you are.
exactly, again, that was the area that was considered good design and luxury, because
Mm-hmm.
I personally feel it's because it was dubbed from European architecture, the European style of design. Again, the whole
Mm-hmm.
gated community,
Yep. Yep.
thing was, and those windows were small.
Ah,
They
like
are
if they.
so small. And then the compound space for each house
Mm-hmm.
doesn't work. Come on. And especially because in Nigeria we have big families,
Yep.
right? It's a thing. So the spaces didn't necessarily work for the families. And
Mm-hmm.
now going back there, because I went back last year, just
Mm-hmm.
it hasn't even been kept up with. And that's another thing that bothers me too. Like, this was a priced estate, right, back then.
Right.
And
Right.
then no one even decided to keep up with it. Why?
Yeah.
We moved on to a new design, we moved on to a new estate. Like, what's
There's
going
something more exciting. Yeah. Yeah. It's one of those grand, I would say, grand failures of our culture, that we just let that happen, and nobody even said, guy, like, how are we going to get air in this place?
on? For
Or
sure.
why does it look like, when it goes to the when it's nighttime, why does the space look like we're in the middle of the forest because it's so dark?
Mm-hmm.
So yes, it is considered a luxury, and we love to copy and paste things. I was actually at a conference at Harvard 2 years ago. No, 3 years. No, it's more like 5 years ago now. Wow, time flies. It was about 5 years ago, and the topic of the conference was It was the African Business Club conference for the Harvard Business School, and the topic was innovation and disruption. We love these exciting buzzwords: disruption, shaking. I want to go back to the African continent and disrupt. However, very little of disruption is actually happening on the African continent. More often than not, we're just copying. The idea is that we're so far behind that we should let's just at least get to the thing they have without thinking specifically about, okay, if we're going to go into all this cost and time to solve a problem in Nigeria, how do we make sure it matches us? How do we make sure that this is sustainable, not just for us but for our grandkids? So.
And I wonder if, because talking about how Dolphin Estate right now, it's almost like no one's taking care of it per se.
Yeah.
I wonder if people don't feel the need or the sense to take care of it because they don't feel like it was theirs in the first place.
Okay, see, that's perfectly.
Yeah, it's true, because I mean, from design school, one thing I got and one thing I always try to do when I'm designing for communities is that I try to make it very personal. So like, apart from what does the community need, it's more like, what is the community used to? How can we really
integrate behaviors? Yeah.
Exactly. So because it's when people start claiming a space as theirs. I mean, it happens with everything, even like our iPhones, our computers. We don't just throw them out. We constantly service the things that we feel belong to us.
Yes.
So maybe that's also why, this is just a thought, right? So maybe that's also why a lot of our buildings are not being maintained properly.
Yeah. I completely. That's a wonderful point. That is a wonderful point. We, if fun, I had this professor in architecture school. Shout out to our architecture school professors. Often very strange individuals, but very, very, very valuable. But he went on the speech about the idea of a place, right? And the conversation was basically that he felt that too many architects nowadays were just copying and pasting designs. I mean, he went off against everybody. Frank Gehry, Zaha Hadid, he was like, these people just go and copy and paste a design just because the client said that they should have the right to say, oh, this doesn't fit this specific place. This doesn't fit their culture. And it was like, that's why he hates he understands having a style to some degree, but like he hates every architect that has too distinct a style, because you can't tell me that what works in Barcelona works the exact same thing in Rochester, New York. Even the environment is not the same. So he made this argument that you have to go to a place, you have to spend months there, you have to taste the rocks. Otherwise anything you're doing there is just violating the people who live here.
I completely agree.
Yes. Now, because that speech lasted 3 hours, he just looked like a crazy person to me at the time. However, it's one of the most valuable lessons I've ever learned.
Wow, I completely agree. Wait, so can we see your sketch?
Oh wait, hold on. I'm trying, guys. So yeah, give me 1 second. I'm still putting finishing touches. I promise you, this will be not as bad as you think. Is everybody still following? Are you guys feeling good about this? Everybody understand the prompts so far? I know folks can reply in the chat.
Yeah, I don't know if anyone's replying. Let me see. I don't think so. No, but I know someone had asked if we're supposed to draw the hut on the screen, on the building of the screen, or a section through it.
Yeah, so you can do either. I actually really want to see the section. We've all seen the kind of front of the hut. What I was asking everybody really to do was to do both a combination of a section, so a section for half of it, and then the front for the other half, basically, so we can see basically what that dynamic looks like, almost like a half cut through sketch, like a cake slice almost. It's a little complex, so if you don't feel like you're able to do that, just do a section. I think that's really what I want to see, what everybody imagines when they think inside, what does the inside of a hut looks like. Yeah.
Hopefully they can tag us on
Yes, please.
Instagram.
Tag us on the grams, on the
Actually, I was also going to ask you about this particular building.
Okay.
The one that's on screen, because I know we talked about it briefly before.
Yeah.
From Ilorin. Can you tell us more about the people in Ilorin and why also you chose this building?
Sure. So I think that so for me, I was of course I've been diving into HUD architecture for a while. I have a book. I think everybody can share the title of the book in the show notes when she puts this up. But it's a book on West Africa, Southwestern and Southern Nigeria. Right, so the guy wrote a series of books capturing the entire Nigerian stratosphere of architecture, and I have that one book. And he basically dives into. I remember like pulling it up, and I just like Southwest Africa. Okay, this guy gonna show me huts, and yeah, they love huts, but like just the complexity, not just of how these huts were arranged when you took a section through them, how it was spatially developed, and it's like wow, these were really kind of magnificent, interesting buildings that like the feeling you feel like when you step into a cathedral and look up and you feel awe, like you would feel that in many of these buildings, and some of them, especially the past buildings, were designed to have that same effect. So these guys were having really highly complex architectural design thoughts even when they were putting some of these spaces together. The way they would ornament the spaces, the way they designed the entrances, the culture around entry into those spaces was just so profound.
Wow.
That I was like, okay, let me see which one I like. So I found a building, a Nupe. The Nupe people were people in the Ilorin, had a strong empire at the time. They are not, so they had the disadvantage of kind of being sandwiched between the southwestern kingdoms,
Mhm.
and the northern kingdom, both of which were fairly aggressive expansionist wise, right? So the Western Kingdom not I won't say as bad as the Northern Kingdom. Northern Kingdom with Usman Dan Fodio and those guys were trying to take over the entirety of what we call Nigeria, really at some point. So they were very aggressive, kind of just spreading their culture and whatnot. So a lot of the Nupe Empire, I think, suffered because of that, but they had such unique, profound architecture, much of which was preserved even those during those expansions. That's one thing that was interesting about when you look at many African wars, like intra-African wars. Rarely ever do you see an African war where the aggressor goes into the other person's house and then destroys everything that existed there. It was very unlikely. Um, but the British were very different. In fact, the Great Wall of Benin, which people would argue was longer than even the Great Wall of China because it was concentric, right? It went round and round, and they essentially built a city into it. So they had the earliest street lamps, very advanced technology. Because the British fought them for 18 years, they were extremely bitter about the time it took to, I would say defeats, which to me is not even. I don't even know if you could accurately say that, but the time it took them to defeat the people of Benin, that they destroyed so much, they looted it. If you go to even I live in Chicago now, so I live very close to the Museum of Modern Art here, and they have Benin Kingdom. The Benin Kingdom's art is so widely, it's because the British came and they stole just
Yeah.
about all of it. So they were extremely destructive and things of that nature. So really, a lot of the erasure of our African history was done via colonialism, unfortunately. Um, it wasn't intra-African wars, and of course, there were kingdoms in themselves. They had expansionist goals and ideals, so they certainly were trying to grow and build and things like that. But we were we weren't as, I would say, brutal
Mm-hmm.
about each other as the British ended up being when they arrived, or when they started to really expand here. So let's see, how's everybody doing on their sketches? Sorry, I'm sketching this section, trying to give some level of. I feel like I'm taking so much time, people are going to be disappointed, but I don't want to take the time and have people be disappointed regardless. So I might as well try a little bit. Um, let's see.
Hey, the important thing is that you tried. Okay.
Yes, I appreciate that. That means the world for me. That's the type of encouragement I need to hear. Um, and let's do some. Let's see. A little bit of.
I'm trying to draw the HUD on the screen. It's actually quite difficult.
To draw on your screen.
Yeah, the no, the HUD on screen we have on
Mhm.
screen. from the beginning.
Yes, I mean, that's not an easy. Do you know how much work it must take to make a singular line of out of thatch, like a straight line on the edge of that roof? This construction, it was not a cakewalk. That's really what it was. Not a simple building to build at the time. So when you hear this idea of like huts being associated with, oh, these guys just didn't know any better, it's quite flawed in my opinion. Um,
I always wonder how much we would have progressed in building if we had just kept refining these ideas that we already had.
right, right, with like new technology and things like that.
Yeah.
That's unfortunately one of those like huge maybes of history, right? If colonialism hadn't happened, or maybe it happened in a different format where, there was more of a, okay, we're coming to your land, we want resources, but we're willing to exchange it for true value that will help you on the long term and
Yeah.
grow, as opposed to an aggressive,
More
you know,
like collaboration.
exactly, which I think would have been far more beneficial for both sets of individuals. We would have had, because then you'd have unlocked the capacity of both empires in that, there are definitely many things that would have been learned for the British and vice versa as well. Technology would have advanced both ways. In a time where it was fairly cheap to expand, the Industrial Revolution may not have been as aggressive as it
Mhm.
was, because I think it would have been tampered by the African ideal of valuing people and things of that nature. And we may not, and just even having a society that prioritizes collaboration may have kind of kept us from many of the world wars we had at the beginning of the new century. So yeah,
Definitely.
that's one of the big maybes of history, unfortunately. Unfortunately, I always think that a lot of folks are like, there was a lot of things going on the African continent, things like that. One of the things they fundamentally misunderstand is that, despite despite the way uh, despite the way the European, I would say, the global North
Mm,
moved on the continent, is that we uniquely didn't have a choice
mm.
of choices in this situation, and I think it's a grand evil that's often understated and underexplained. So, let me find my. Let me put some environment around. I'm close. I promise, guys. I'm sure everybody else is done sketching, and I'm just the only one here and trying to figure out how to draw trees. It's been so long. In construction, they don't let you draw often, unfortunately. Let's see. Put the sun shining. All right. I think I'm ready. I'm ready to show you guys. Goodness. Goodness. How do I share my screen? Let's see. Yep, share screen.
Did you
Oh,
get?
it says host disabled participant screen sharing.
Okay, let me see if I can enable your screen sharing.
And thanks for the folks who've been on listening to us kind of go on. I really appreciate.
Definitely. Yeah.
Yeah, because I run a podcast myself, I don't get to listen to myself at all. Or like I don't get to be the one talking ever. So this has been fun. Oops.
Okay, so try sharing now.
Okay, so sharing screen. Let's start. Boom, share. Okay, can you guys see my screen?
Yes. Oh,
There.
wow. Okay.
All right. So I tried to just put together a couple of simple concepts very quickly, and I'll show you kind of where, like, the books I've been reading that kind of gave me this, like, oh wow, okay, this is what's actually behind the scenes. So one of the major misconceptions people have is like they draw a hut, they draw a section to a hut, and it's like just huts, no columns, no walls, just huts. Just like they just sat on the ground and and whatnot. No shade to anybody who didn't draw any columns or anything like that. But like these are routine, like you gotta support these things out somehow. And some of them had massive spans, which was like exciting and impressive. But many of them were kind of broken up into these columns that would often like delineate the space. And also even in some cultures, depending on which column you're at is where your station is in that society. And now the way to think about it is that these columns were arranged in a circular kind of arrangement all the way around. I think we just got a question. Let's see. Ooh. Will, of course, stereotype attached to. Okay. Ooh. Okay. We'll dive into that question a little later. Give me a second. Yeah. So these columns were arranged in a circular kind of motion around for example, a palace, and depending on where you're at, there's some people that are not allowed to even enter the building first. You're out here chilling. So you're Mr. Man, sorry, stick man over there. Some folks are stick man over here. However, some people get to dress a little nicer and they get to sit here and stay on their knees. The Oba often starts at the center, almost describing him on his throne as the center of the entire. So there was a whole culture around even spatial behavior within these spaces, arranged through columns. Now, all of these thatch roofs were essentially just micro trusses, tiny little trusses that were carrying and transferring the weight evenly across this round circular building. Extremely difficult to design. And also, you guys know how much rain we get in Nigeria and in the tropical region of Nigeria, most of Africa, etc., etc. These things are watertight, which is one of the biggest. If anybody's ever worked on the building, you always have watertight issues. And these guys designed a circular rotunda and they made it watertight. So when you start to think of like how impressive some of the challenges that were being solved here is that it was amazing. Even the material, mud and thatch being used to make up these walls, clay, effectively. Those things are natural coolants, right? So they absorb heat and let go of heat in the best types of ways for those types of environments so that people can feel warmer in the evenings but still remain cool during the day. So like there are so many factors so these people were thinking extremely carefully about the types of things they would build. They experimented, they tried different things, they found modules that worked for them and then iterated on top of that, which is really just the design process, right? So when you start to thinking about African ancient architecture or pre-colonial architecture in that manner gives you a lot more respect for what these folks were doing at the time. So in my building, I have my little columns delineating the space. There are trusses going across to connect columns to each other, transfer the load from columns to each other, and things of that nature. Now, let me show you the picture. Let me share screen.
So I have a quick question. So these columns that you show, right? They kind of represent spatial hierarchy, or they start to create spatial hierarchy?
So depending on the type of the building, so palace buildings specifically, they oftentimes delineated, here's where this level of person gets to. Here's how close you can be to the king, who's usually in the center, right? And oftentimes these things were divided into, so like sometimes almost the way it's delineated right here. I don't know if you guys can see my pen. Let me put a red pen on so you guys can see my pencil. Let me change the color. Color is red. Okay, so this delineation, right, would be delineation between private and public, right? So people came to see the king here, and there are a bunch of walls to where his recluses, where things to take care of him were. So there are so many interesting ways to design spaces that they did that actually, to be honest with you, oftentimes outmatch even what many modern architects have done with the circular form, in my opinion. So it's just an exciting thing it was an exciting discovery for me. Let me show you kind of the picture of the Nupe Palace, of an actual Nupe Palace. Let me see, new share, bleep, 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 boom. Share from my pod. Can you guys see that?
Yes.
There we go. So I don't know if I have, so that's kind of what I was talking about as far as the thatch roofs. There's another slightly different form, right there with the trusses. Let me zoom in, see if I can do that. Nope, that is not zooming. I can't figure that out right now. But this is basically kind of some of those ideas of how the space was broken up into circular forms. And they literally did so many interesting and different variations of things with the circular forms that it was, it's very, very impressive. So this is kind of where that idea, that's where my form-based thinking was coming from my sketch.
Wow.
Is out now.
I need to get this book.
Yes, I will share with you, and then you can share it with the group.
Yes.
Let me go back to my sketch and we can answer. I think some more questions came in. Okay, so the question, a bit off course, but how accurate is the stereotype attached to architects being the biggest headaches to civil engineers? Hmm. Architects are the biggest headaches to everybody. Let's keep it. Let's keep it 100. I'm joking. I'm joking. I'm not joking at all. Um, so if you are unfamiliar, just so the guys that are on the call are aware of, you know, how the design structure often works, just that types of relationship wise, is that there's an owner, Mr. Owner over here, owner. My handwriting is horrible. There's owner, and then the owner hires an architect, right? Architect. And then the owner also typically hires a construction manager. So
Yeah.
this relationship is not contractual, right? So it's just a good faith. We want to make sure we can get what the owner needs done, right? There are usually things in the architect's contract or the owner's contract with the CM or both vice versa that say, oh, you have to do this with the architect. But we don't have a
Contract.
we don't have a contract with each other. It's just generally structured that we have to work in the best interest of each other most times, kind of, so that the building gets done and so that we also don't lose money, right? Now, the architect also typically has the civil engineer, right? So the civil engineer, they call them their consultants. So they hire a civil guy, they hire a landscape guy, and all these folks have a contractual relationship with the architect. Not one with the owner, just the architect. Sometimes the architect may hire their own landscaper, the owner might hire their own landscaper, rather what happens. The CM has the actual building folks. So they hire they hire the electrician. They call them subcontractors. They hire the electrician, you know, the plumber, et cetera, et cetera. So just that's a real quick like overview. And I'd say the most common of like building structures, right?
Yeah.
Now the question that he was asking is if the architect is the biggest headache of the civil, who is the person they hire. In my experience, it's not as bad as people try to make it seem. So the architect is always gonna, yeah, no, it's not as bad. Like of the comparative relationship, the architect CM relationship, fam, that's where you see fireworks.
That's true.
So with their civil engineer, because the civil guy has a contract with the architect, that legal relationship automatically makes, you know, it reduces the likelihood of conflict. However, the architect's general job, and this, you know, happens with structural engineering as well, is that they'll come and design something that may not be fully figured out to the details and everything like that. The civil guys, the structural guys come and say, so here's how this works, here's the size of the beam, here's the type of connection that's going to need to happen to make this work, things like that. It's an extensive process. And then the whole thing works together, right? Both for civil and structure. So if the building was shaped this way, right? They have to think about every single point, every connection, everything like that. However, if the architect says, you know what, we're feeling that it should be shaped this way instead. People and the instructor have to go and redesign everything. It's not just like, oh, I'm gonna change these 2 points. They have to go and redesign everything. However, what people don't understand oftentimes is that it's not the architect that's saying that. It's the owner that's saying, oh, actually, I want to do this. Or I've worked on buildings where the owner's like, I want to add another floor, or I want to remove 5 floors, or you know, I've seen massive variations by an owner. So it's also good to know how to be a good owner, which is why I appreciated my experience working as an owner. Because the more variation you bring into the project, the more it's going to cost you, first of all. And just the more heartache and heartburn is going to give this guy, the more heartburn this guy is going to give all of those guys, the tired those guys are going to get of this guy, the more likely mistakes will happen, you know, because if I'm redesigning the building every 3 days, it's like something's going to go wrong at some point. So I wouldn't say the architects are the biggest headaches to civil engineers. Civil engineers are wonderful. I think the civil engineering bag is really when they start to do like underground projects. Civil engineers, I mean, they get into that bag, they'll build a 500 foot tunnel, do this and the next. It's extremely noble, etc., etc. But the conflict often ends up being, an architect and a CM has beef because
That's how it is. I mean,
that's how it is.
the CM is always trying to use the I guess the cheapest material,
Oh,
and
absolutely.
it's not always of the best value or equal value.
Yeah, it's one of those tricky things because the cheaper or the more basic the material is with the CM, the easier they can estimate its cost when giving a cost proposal to the owner,
That's
right?
true.
The more complex, if it's because architects will come and they'll be like, oh, we want this tile from Italy that's in Germany. They sprayed the butter on and then they had to go to Peru to have the diamonds glazed on the thing. And CM is like, I don't know how to price that. Give me a regular towel that I can buy from Home Depot so that I can. It looks the same. Glad it's white. It's not both white. So I think oftentimes the CM is pushing for like simplicity, not just for the sake of cost, but just for the sake of like we want to know how much, because the CM is carrying a lot of risk
Hmm.
typically. So if it's a
Hmm.
60 million, yeah, because there's $60 million project for construction costs, the owner pays the CM that entire amount eventually over the course of the project, and then the CM pays out to you. So it goes through their books. But if the project ends up being 90 million and they made a mistake, that CM oftentimes is on the hook for all of that, right?
For sure.
So there's a lot of risk that a construction manager is carrying. So they're always trying to minimize variability. And that's not easy to do when the architect or the owner are changing their minds frequently.
For sure.
Did that answer our anonymous attendee's question?
I hope so. But before, because we're actually coming to time now.
Okay.
This has been a fantastic conversation.
Hopefully.
Before we go, though, I wanted to ask, who has been your biggest influence? I think you kind of mentioned a little bit, but tell us in your career, who has been your biggest influence?
Boy, influence. So I'm interesting in that, with the exception of maybe one, two, three people,
Mm-hmm.
I have almost like a rolling list of influence.
Wow.
It's like, okay, I find something really cool about this person at this moment. I love that person. I take that thing, I try and learn as much about why they think that way or how they think that way. And kind of, if the person does something stupid or I discover something else about the person that's not as ideal, I take the thing I've gained from the person and I keep it moving. That's how I am. I like carry my own and yeah, I'm not bound to I'm not a fanboy for anybody. I don't know you. I don't know where you were. I don't know how you were. I don't know the things you've done in your life. So I try and I'm tied to the idea and not to the person. Never the person. With the exception of very few people. Of course, I mentioned my grandfather was a huge
Yeah.
influence. Just on the impact in my life. My father, as a result, both because of the way he taught me about architecture and things like that. I think my mom turned me from being somebody who was just like creatively loosey goosey to somebody who's like more process oriented.
Mm.
She's extremely process oriented, and I became process oriented as a result of the way she likes to break things down into steps and things like that. In fact, the way I explain things oftentimes fit a pattern because of the way she's taught me to think about just life in general. Other massive influences are my family. Just I think that a huge part of your life will end up being how you treat people.
Mm.
Uh, and when your resume doesn't get picked up, when you don't get the callback for the interview, when things that are less ideal happen, the things that often break I've often found broken through for me have been, somebody has a good memory of their interaction with me. And that's entirely due to my family correcting me when I'm wrong, my wife being a phenomenal influence on the way I treat people and just being outgoing to a greater degree than I was used to. So I've those are my influences. I would say family wise. Beyond that, architects wise, huge. I was a big fan of David Ajay. I think now I'm about to put some heat. I'm about to put some spicy out into the streets. I think he's a horrible speaker. Goodness gracious. I have never met anybody that, oh my goodness, he is so bad at explaining his own ideas.
Oh,
But his ideas, the versatility of his ideas, the way
amazing.
he thinks about space, the way he goes into every single building, like he almost blank slates every building. All right,
Mm.
he goes to every building and says, okay, what are the things I'm taking from these people? What are the things that are going to be important? What are the things that are important for him to reflect? Which is why you're never going to see two David Ajay buildings that are exactly the same. Never. And there's somebody that's a star architect. And also just seeing somebody black and African be a popular major architect.
For sure.
Doing all types of great work all over the world. It's like, okay, that's a minimum is great. Now he's a horrible speaker, so I'm not taking that from him. But I love the way he's implemented work. There are other things about him I find far less ideal, of course. But those two things I take. Those are my I appreciate. I like Mies van der Rohe. I think that I wish more African kids understood an architect like him. Because unfortunately, the Western European influence tells you this idea that architecture is this incredibly complicated thing that you need layers and layers of access and education to be able to get and think through. Whereas Mies is just like put the minimum valuable product out there and perfect that minimum valuable product in itself, in its entity and its purest form. And that's your building, right? Do the simplest of ideas. And a lot of his less is more and the things he's famous for where we're based around that. That's why am I doing chandelier, this, that, and give thick box, glass, steel. That's your building, you know, great glass, great steel, very well thought of, all the arrangements, all the spacing, very well done. But I think that it really, for me personally, studying under kind of that ethos of architecture, just it simplified what good architecture was to me. And made it far more accessible. At worst, it serves as a basis for you to build upon. Like, okay, if you want to spend a career doing more complex architecture, it serves as a good basis. And then two, at best, you know, you found a form of perfecting your own simplest of ideas. And all of our simplest of ideas is very different. The first thing we all start with, our first sketch is always very different. As you can probably see from the sketches that I've put out, that everybody has put out, nobody's sketches look alike. But you know, if the bare minimum we do is perfecting those sketches, perfecting those simplest ideas we've put on the paper, I think that often makes for some incredible architecture. And I would like to figure out a way for that idea to be more accessible to African children, African architects, things of that nature.
That's amazing. Everything you've just said. Also with the whole you know, with your whole explanation and honestly educating us today. I know I learned a lot of history of Nigeria that I hadn't even, you know, heard of before, right? So especially with this sketch, your sketch of the HUD. I don't know why this, you know, why you weren't so proud, I guess, to show this to us.
I'm not a phenom. I'm great at sketching ideas, sketching actual buildings and replicating life, boy.
Well, but I mean, I think you did a pretty good job, and you know, it just gave me a whole new understanding of what, or the way designers and architects thought about putting things together, especially for people, you know, in terms of spatial hierarchy. So I will definitely be getting that book from you. Can you quickly stop sharing your screen? Actually, I want to go back to my presentation right before we wrap up.
Okay.
Thank you very much. Okay, let me know. Okay, so you actually, perfect. Let's go back here. Can you see my screen?
I can now see your screen.
Perfect. So everyone that's in, thank you so much for joining. Again, this will all be on, as you'll have access to this as a replay on YouTube later in the week. And I'll also be sharing the audio on all our podcast platforms, right? And definitely, please don't forget to follow us, like, share, you know, share your sketches with us. And please, please, please follow Pod Save Africa, because it is an awesome podcast to learn a lot about everything that's going on in the African content.
And if you hear my voice, I speak a lot less on my own podcast, I promise.
Hey, this was your chance. Okay, this was your chance to shine.
This is my one shot. So if it's good, I'll know from the feedback.
So, well, lastly, thank you everyone, and thank you so much to Akinade for joining us this morning and teaching us so much. Our next episode will be on August 16th, so stay tuned, everyone.